Right, okay, so this is a response to another question about using external instruments. And this question is about the kind of reverse of what I was demonstrating in the last video. So, as opposed to sending MIDI notes from live into a drum machine and then just getting the audio to feed back through live and mixing it, this question is about, I believe, I may have misinterpreted, but is about getting a pattern, if you like, from the EMX or from a drum machine and getting that pattern, that MIDI pattern, into live, and also getting the audio associated with that pattern into live and having it all basically working in a drum rack in live. That's my interpretation of the question. It may be wrong. So say you're working on the EMX, you're working on a whichever drum machine. I'm using the TR-505 today because I just can't be bothered to set the EMX up. And I've got some patterns in there that play, and I'll just bring up my mixer volume here, and I'll just play you this super simple TR-505 pattern I've been working on. Okay, so that's directly from the drum machine. Okay, and as you can hear, it's obviously it's a pattern that I've programmed in, and it's the sounds from inside the drum machine. Now, say I really like that, but actually I want that inside live, so I can play with it inside live. There's two things I need to do. First thing I need to do is record the MIDI, and then I need to record the audio, and I need to slice that audio up in a meaningful way so that I can put it into a drum rack and reproduce that drum pattern. Okay, so actually what I might do to start with, just as a reference point, no, we'll leave it as it is. Okay, so basically what I'm going to need, I'll just get rid of a couple of these tracks because we're only going to need an audio track and a MIDI track. Now, from the drum machine, I have MIDI out going to the MIDI in on my sound card. Okay, and as you can see now, I've turned the through volume down so you won't hear anything. But if I press play, you can see here in the MIDI track 1, because if I go into my preferences, you'll see here that I have my TC MIDI in is active. I'll just activate those as well. But yeah, so I can receive MIDI from my sound card. Okay, so that MIDI is coming in. So when I'm playing the pattern on the 505, I can see those MIDI notes coming through, and if I activate the monitor in, I can see those various hits coming through. If I turn this through volume up again, just so you can hear, you can see the relative velocities of those notes as well. Interesting. Okay, so that's the MIDI coming in, and if I wanted to now, I can record on that track. Okay, and then I can just record that pattern. Now, one of the problems I'm going to have now is synchronizing the BPM, okay, because the tempo here, and obviously I could dial in exactly the same tempo that's on the drum machine. If I was using the EMX, I can do that specifically to the BPM, so I could dial in 120 BPM. But I would still then have to start recording at exactly the same time that I press the start button, or I'd have to do some trimming. And with the TR-505 that I've got here, there isn't actually a readout for the BPM, it's just a dial. So it's completely vague, I have no idea. So if I was to try and record this as a MIDI clip now, which I'll do just to demonstrate, if I hit record here, I'll see this pattern here being recorded, and I'll let it play through the pattern a bit, and then I'll stop it. Not quite got 4 bars there, it was a bit short-sighted. Oh no, I got bang on 4 bars, that was good. Okay, I can stop this. Now if I look at this MIDI pattern I've got, okay, that's great, that's 4 bars, but is it actually 4 bars? Because I've not got no idea of what the tempo is inside the 505. Now what I could do is I could play it again, and I could use the tap tempo. But as you know, that's only going to give me a rough tempo. The other thing I could do, and I'm just going to show a few different ways here. The other thing I could do is just stick the metronome on, and I could do this to try and till it's bang on, so DJ style. It's already going out though. Okay, so that's DJ style doing it. So I've literally been nudging it to try and keep the tempo locked to that metronome. So now I've got a MIDI pattern here that should be roughly in time. It might mean that I've got to go in here and quantize it. Okay, so, and the third way of doing it, because that might obviously prove to be a little bit of a pain in the arse, is to synchronize Ableton with your drum machine. Okay. This is probably going to be the most accurate, but it is a slightly more complicated way of doing it. So what I would need to do is go back into my preferences and enable the synchronization in for that, whatever that instrument is, because pretty much most instruments, EMX definitely, even the 505 here, which is quite old, most things will put out their own time code, if you like, their own MIDI clock. And so if I turn this on, that will enable me to synchronize Ableton to the input here, because this is the input, synchronize to the input. And when I do that, you can then see the external sync button here. And if I turn that on, what will happen is the tempo here will go grey, and you'll see it's immediately changed to something around 120.5. So it wasn't far off. And if I turn the tempo up and down on the 505 now, if I just turn it up a bit, you can see this is responding to that tempo change. So it's basically working out for me what the clock is, what the MIDI clock is coming out of the 505. So theoretically now, when I press start and stop, yeah, as it does on the 505, it's also starting and stopping Ableton. That's brilliant, because that enables me then to record arm this like this, or is it not going to? Okay, so it doesn't let me actually record that at the start. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it count through the. It's a 16 measure loop, so I'm just going to wait till it gets to the little fill at the end of the 16, and then I'm going to hit record. 13, 14, 16. Here we go. Oh, it was 17 even. It's got a fill in there. Okay, but that's fine because we can trim this stuff anyway. Of course, it's 17 because it starts on 1 with this, unlike most things start on 0. So I'm just going to let that play, and you can see that, you know, just looking at those grid lines. Okay, just looking at those grid lines, I can stop that now, and I can unsynchronize it, which will bring it back to the Ableton clock. And what I can do then is just trim this. It is actually a 17 bar loop, interestingly enough. So let's just lose the first bar, and then we can crop that. So we've got the MIDI part out of the EMX, and it should be pretty much in time. Although what will be interesting, if you zoom in, you'll see how much delay is in that signal, how much latency is in that MIDI transmission. It's a reasonable amount, but it shouldn't be. What you can do, if you want to get this super tight, is you can go into here. Oh look, I've already got this offset from an experiment I was doing yesterday. So if I set that back to 0 and just repeat the process, see what happens this time. Okay, so that's even more, you can see that's even more delay. So if I go back into here and bring this down to, let's say, 45, let's try it again. You can see that's much tighter. You can see how that's much closer. Okay, it's still it's interesting how these older machines have these inaccuracies as well, but I like that. That's part of what makes things sound not quite so clinical. Anyway, so I could bring this down probably another 10 milliseconds or something, and it would still be it would still respond well to the. Okay, it's now actually a bit early, so that's good. So with a little bit of tweaking, and of course this will remain fairly consistent, this latency setting. So once you get it right for that machine, okay, well, for whatever reason it's sending it miles off now. The quirks of MIDI. This is what we used to deal with all the time. Okay, so it does seem like it just takes a little bit to settle in at the start. But anyway, all of that aside, that's how you would get your MIDI recorded in. Now if we go back to the one that we trimmed to 16, is it this one? No, this one. No, this one. Yeah. Okay, so what we can do with this, of course, is we can select it all and we can quantize it. And that will take it all pretty much to the closest 16th, if that's your quantized setting. So now I've got a MIDI pattern that we've ripped out of the device, and I'm just going to isolate this one. This is the one we're going to work with, okay? This is our best recording of that. And again, once this is set up, you won't then have to readjust that MIDI setting and stuff for doing the other patterns and parts from in that machine. They'll all be the same. Right, so the next thing is, we've got that, now we need the sounds to go with it, okay, because this is just a drum pattern. And we could drag this into any drum rack. So if I just go to drums and choose like a, well, let's see, I haven't even got a 505, but let's go for the 606. I'll drag that into an empty space here, okay. So I could put this MIDI pattern, I'm just going to copy it over to this one. Now what you'll notice is if I zoom in, because of the way general MIDI works, these should be, I say should, they should be on the right hits, but they're not. This bottom one, which is the kick, is actually on a snare because of the way this drum rack's set up. So I'm just going to move these notes down onto the kick. But the hat's on the right note and the snare's on the right note. Okay, so when I play this back, oh, it won't play because it's synced to the external. I undo that. Okay, so I can now play that back through any drum machine in live that I want. Yeah. Okay, so that's that. So we know we've got a drum pattern that works. So now the next thing is I've got my MIDI pattern from the machine, and now I need the audio to go with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the external sync again, and as you can see, when I'm playing, when I'm playing the drum part, you can see the audio's coming in because I've got the audio coming into the sound card here on 1 and 2. And if I put monitor in, I can hear what's coming in from the drum machine. Okay. Now again, that's not synchronized. Okay, that's not synchronized to Ableton in any way at the moment because it's not synced here. So if I synchronize this up and record arm here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press, I can't arm record before we start, interesting, just because of the EXD mode, but basically I'm going to start the drum pattern again, and then when we get round to the beginning of the pattern, so that 16th measure, I'm going to record it again as audio, okay? I'm going to slow it down a bit as well. 13, 14, 15. Okay. Okay, and that's going to do, okay. Oh yeah. So, what we've got now is some audio that we've recorded. I'm going to simplify this whole process and just get this back down to a 1-bar loop. Okay, so we've just got this bit of MIDI, the 1-bar loop, and we're going to isolate the first bar of this recording. Okay, just to keep this nice and simple. Now if I play this back, you can see that obviously it's a bit late as well. You can set up the delay. You can set up the delay compensation for recording using the built-in delay compensation lesson that comes with Live, and that basically enables you to calculate the error that you need to put in here for you know, this latency between sending the signal out and getting the audio back in. But for this kind of purpose, you just get that stuff set up at the start, and then you wouldn't need to set it up again for that particular device in that particular setup. Okay, but we're not going to bother with that, because basically what we've got here is exactly what we need. Now the important thing here is when you take a first glance at this this recorded loop, that you can see that the transient markers, not the warp markers, but the little grey transient markers, are pretty much exactly picked out where the transients in this are, and there aren't any extra or unnecessary ones in there. Okay, I'm going to delete the warp markers just to be sure that they're not also clocked as transients, okay, which they're not. So those transient markers have already picked out those sounds there. So if I was to crop this just to get rid of the extra stuff either side, and then what I need to do then is to right click on this audio clip, slice it to a new MIDI track, and I'm going to use the transient setting here, and then click OK. And that's made us a drum rack here with those slices in, and I'm just going to check through. Yeah, so what it's done is it has made the very first section here a slice. So I'm going to delete that one, and then I'm just going to move these all down one. Now if I'd been particularly bothered, I would have made sure that I trimmed that off before I sliced it to a new MIDI track, but now basically okay, which I've got those 3 notes, but basically it is just 3 notes repeated. There's the kick, there's the hat, the kick with the hat on it, there's the hat on its own, there's the snare with the hat on it, and so just those 3 notes. So if I wanted to, I could just get rid of the other ones. Gives me those 3 notes, okay, and those are the 3 notes that are being played in our MIDI pattern here. This one. Okay. Although of course this is a much longer MIDI pattern, I'm going to use this one, crop it. So this is just our 3 notes, 1, 2, 3. So if I now put a copy of this onto, of course when you slice it gives you the sliced MIDI, so I get rid of that. So if I put that onto here, you can see that actually the notes aren't on the right slices. So you're just going to have to adjust these. Now this is primarily to do with the note output of the drum machine, and if you match everything up, so if you make sure your drum machine's outputting the MIDI notes on the right, if you make sure the drum machine's outputting the right MIDI notes, then most of the time these will come in, these will be in the right place. And actually I think that these need to be the other way around, because this is the hi-hat. Okay, so basically what we've got now is this, which is a reconstruction of the original. If I put this in, that's the original loop coming straight through from the drum machine. and that's the reconstituted loop. Now you'll notice that it's a little bit snappy. If I let the release out a bit here, then we'll get a nicer, fuller sound. It'll be more like the original. Okay, just like that. Now obviously there's quite a few stages in there, and there's definitely room for doing it really accurately from the very start, so that you don't have to do so much mucking about. But once you've got this set up, you can basically, it will be much easier. Obviously once you've got the first couple of loops recorded in and you've dealt with all your latency issues, you should then be able to record in all the various parts that you've created in your EMX or your drum machine, whatever it is, and have them as instruments inside Live. So although this is a very simple part with only 3 sounds in it, I could then of course name this my whatever 505 wacko loop. Okay, whatever that is. I'd need to name this one as well. Maybe it's wacko loop 1. And then of course I can then drag that into wherever I want to keep it inside my own user library, so that I can drag that particular instrument into any other project. That will obviously drag the instrument and that particular MIDI pattern, so that can be dragged into any project. And of course that then opens it up to whatever kind of you can obviously then reprogram inside Live your drum loops and drum patterns from the external machine. Brilliant, hope that's helpful. There's quite a lot in there, so any more questions, hit me up. I'm more than happy to provide basic answers and stuff. Take care, bye bye.